Hello there, because I'm Carlos, episode 30. Yes, we do have an episode. We're back on the audio version. Although it's funny because on the YouTube channel, I've been recording videos nonstop pretty much the entire time, but nothing in the month of January as far as one of these audio only ones. And I was looking for the right topic because there were a couple of different ones that on the YouTube channel I thought would have been good candidates, but I did have the visual element. So when I'm trying to show you something, it doesn't really jive with the audio version of this. But I thought I would put one together here, beginning of February, coming back, and I'm going to try to, like I said previously, try to do about one of these a month, give or take, but it's, whatever cadence it comes up in. So if you're on the audio feed, you're going to get a little bit of a pleasant surprise. It's been a little while. If you're on the YouTube channel, you've been getting content this whole time anyway. So I do recommend that YouTube channel as the hub as far as seeing any content or anything going on with it. And you will still get these audio versions because I'll put them on the YouTube channel as well. So it's available in both venues, depending on what your preference is. So I didn't have one specific topic that I wanted to tackle on this one, although I do have one that's going to be kind of the main one that I'll kind of interweave between the discussion here. More than anything, I'm just kind of sitting back and looking at where things are sitting as far as sports cards are going right now in the beginning of 2023. We obviously have the different economic factors going into it, and is beyond the scope of this podcast to discuss that at any length, but it is a factor. It's important. Inflation is going to be part of that. How that affects people spending money is going to be part of that. And I'm not overly concerned with the market, but it's one of those things you can't ignore it because it's also going to play into, even if you're slowing down your collecting, even if you're still collecting at close to the same pace, depending on what your situation is. You still have to factor all that in because you have to think to yourself, okay, how is this going to affect what I'm trying to do? How is this going to affect the prices I'm going to pay, what I'm going to offer? Or if I'm selling, how's that going to affect what I'm going to get back for it? All of these things kind of play into it. So it is important. We can't ignore it. We don't have to obsess over it, but we definitely can't forget about it as part of our consideration. For me, for the beginning of this year, it's kind of been kind of a mixed bag in terms of what I've been trying to do. The plan has been to go to the national this year. That is one of the things kind of on the roadmap here this year. And that's still the intention, but one thing that has definitely put a wrinkle in it is that I've definitely come across some things that I wanted to pick up that I ended up picking up for the personal collection, which of course take some money out of the budgeting. Definitely the budget here should definitely be more streamlined, and we definitely want to be putting some money aside. But there's been some challenges to that, especially in the first part of this year. Now, one of the things I did to try to mitigate that a little bit, knowing that there would be some stuff like that, is I also wanted to put some stuff on eBay, and that's actually been fairly successful. I'll get another envelope too out in the mail on Monday, so that's great. But it's one of those things like, some money comes in and then some comes out. And I think one thing particularly, I had one specific problem that came in, and this is more of a first world problem kind of situation, especially when the collecting side of things, is that it's not really a problem per se, but I had a seller that I guess bought a collection, and they ended up getting a whole stack of Medano cards that would be perfect additions to the PC. But they also priced them accordingly. It's a lot of high-end stuff and really nice stuff, but definitely some stuff I would love to add to the collection, but it's also priced like that. Now, I suppose the good news is that even though they're very aggressive with their pricing, I did identify one or two cards that I thought were interesting. I was able to talk to them a little bit and come to an agreed upon deal. We did purchase it on eBay, so all above board there. And we were able to come to a deal that we were happy with, and they turned on the best offer so that I could make an offer and they could accept it. Nonetheless, really nice stuff, but it's one of those situations where you look at your budget and go like, yeah, that's not going to work. And it's unfortunate. It's one of those things where you can't really predict the timing of one of these things. When something like that comes up where it's like really nice stuff, that's definitely been something you've been chasing after for a while, you kind of have to figure out what you're going to do as far as your collecting side of things. For me, really what it comes down to is there's a couple other ones that I've identified that I've bookmarked that I'll try to see maybe if that over the next couple of months, if it's still there, I'm going to have to hold back. I really don't have a choice. I did pick up a nice one, added it to my collection, put it on Instagram and everything. It's a beautiful card. But at the same time, some of these other ones, even though they're really nice and would be great additions as well, I simply can't afford it. So for me, the only thing I can do is I have to continue down the path and continue down the plan that I have set out. That doesn't mean that over the next couple of months I couldn't grab a card or two if we're able to negotiate it, which would be amazing, and they would be fun additions to have, but I have to sit back and I have to wait. I have to exercise some patience here as far as that's concerned. And in addition to it, I have to continue down a disciplined path, adding stuff onto my eBay account. And then hopefully, maybe if the sales work out well, maybe I could grab another card or two. So it's kind of taking that disciplined approach that's hard to do. The delayed gratification thing, I'm not really saying anything shocking here, but the delayed gratification thing is a legitimate challenge. Especially if you're someone who really likes having adding those pieces to it, the fun that is getting the stuff in the mail. And delayed gratification is not fun, but it's one of those things where it is useful and it is something that can make it very satisfying when you do add those pieces into the collection. So that's a challenge that I'm finding myself right now that I'm specifically dealing with at the moment. Now, with all that said, let's talk about a few other things that I've got on my mind at the moment. One of the other items that I've been keeping an eye out on, and this is just a recent thing that just came this past week, was that ComC made an upgrade, basically made a deal with CSG and CGC, both same parent company, in order to add the feature of being able to submit cards for grading. Now, I did talk about that on the YouTube channel and made a video about it, but now I've had the chance now, a couple of days since, I've been able to actually go through the process of adding two different cards and submitting them to CSG directly through that option. And it's one of those things where I'm going to keep tabs on it on the YouTube channel and kind of report back my findings. Now, I still believe what I said in my previous one, although I'm getting a little more information as I'm actually going through the process of doing it, which has been really fun. It's one of those things where if you are interested in stuff like that, it's good to just try it for yourself. I wouldn't rely on somebody else to explain it to you. A lot of it isn't very complicated anyway. ComC themselves has like a 2-minute and 30-second video telling you exactly how to do it. It's a couple button clicks. It's not complicated. But there are a couple of wrinkles in which cards are allowed and in what circumstances they're allowed. And sometimes you do have to run it through the elite processing, and most of the time you don't. So I had a chance to play around with both combinations of it. And also one thing that I did realize when I tried it out is that even when you submit some cards, if you this is more of a Canadian thing, there's a little bit of a delayed period before it goes over into the US warehouse. So if it's in the Canadian warehouse, it's stored remotely, quote unquote, then that does force you to put it through you actually have to wait until it's available on the other warehouse. I'm not sure if you can run it through the Elite one or not. I haven't had a chance to try that one yet, but I do know that you have an additional step. So you're not able to go straight to grading if it's one of those ones that's stored remotely. And you're also not allowed to go straight to grading if it's one of those ones that has a stock image. So that's an example of like an e-pack. So out of the two cards that I decided to try out, just to give it a go, it's one of those things where if you're just trying something out, I grab a handful. It makes the most sense. So I have one card that definitely went through e-pack, and that one has been sent off to go to CSG. They're going to process it and send it off, and that should be about a month. And then another one I actually purchased on the ComC platform directly, and then I clicked the button to do that as well. So I'm going to see one of them is scheduled to be about 4 weeks, and the other one is scheduled to be sometime in 8 weeks. So we'll see over the next couple of months how that goes. I'll report back kind of the progress and also report back how I found the process to be and how effectively they did it for me and if they met the timelines and all that good stuff. But stuff like that is interesting to me, not necessarily from the flipping side of things. And it's kind of what I talked about in the video is that the more interesting part of it for me is more for PC because I like the CSG holder personally. And it's one of those ones where for certain PC cards, I think it would make a lot of sense. Not for everything, but it goes back to a conversation I had this week as well, where I know a couple of different bulk submitters and I'm friends with them. And it's one of those funny things where sometimes they find themselves having to have tough conversations with different clients that want to submit cards because they think, oh, well, you got to get these cards graded. And oftentimes they have to give, better advice, which is to say like, hey, you don't have to get everything graded. And it's one of those things where I find myself having these discussions with folks who are a little bit less familiar, where I just say, hey, look, just because there's a bunch of cards that are graded out there doesn't mean you have to get everything graded. And I've always tried to treat third-party grading as a tool in the toolbox. That's the way I describe it. It's a thing you can do. It's not necessary. But you've always got the people that are like completely militant one way or the other, like, oh no, you got to get it graded, or oh no, I hate graded cards. I don't want any graded cards. And I think both positions are silly. I think there are situations where it makes sense, and there are situations where it doesn't. And there are collectors for which it doesn't make sense for you, and for you, that's great. And if that's the case, well then don't get it graded. Don't bother with it. And if you get a graded card, you can crack it out. So you've got all those options available to you. But don't try to tell other people that they can't or they shouldn't because it doesn't make any sense. For them, it might make sense to do that. And some people might just like doing it. And it's one of those things where I'm not going to tell somebody what to do with their money. It's really what it comes down to. But that doesn't mean we can't advise to go, hey, look, you're interested in having this card, you just want to put it in a nicer holder. And that's where I looked at one of the examples they gave me, and I just said, a one-touch would probably do the job just very nicely for them. It's like, it's $3. I think it's $3 right now for a package of 5 one-touches where I am. So it's one of those things where it's like, no, for a fairly reasonable price, you could put it in the holder and there you go. And that should be more than enough for protection and all that. And you should be quite happy with that. It's not necessary, even at the lowest bulk price points, which I think is about $10-12. I think CSG has it for like $10-ish if you get all the discounts and everything. But even then, $10 is $10. It's not necessary unless it's something you really want. For those CSG cards that I'm doing through ComC, I want them in the holder. So I've made the decision to do that. So I'll pay for that. But I didn't have to. And it's one of those things where as long as I understand that, and I'm only sending 2. So it's one of those things where I'm not trying to send every card in my collection. And I just find it tricky for if somebody who's in a bulk submitting position where it's like, on the one hand, you're trying to make business. But on the other hand, the best advice for a lot of those folks is like, hey, sometimes some of these cards belong in these holders where it makes sense. So maybe if you just want it, then fine, send in whatever you want. But oftentimes, like, look, man, you could put this in binder pages and it would be great. Or you could put these in top loaders and it'd be great. Or, put it in one touches. There are a lot of different options that don't cost as much that would allow you to enjoy your collection just the same. It isn't necessary to submit it. Again, it's a tool in a toolbox, but not every tool is required for every job. And that's kind of the way that I would present that as an analogy, where if it makes sense, then definitely it's an option for you. And then you can pick which one makes the most sense in terms of what you're trying to get done. But if it doesn't make sense, well, then, leave it alone. It's perfectly fine. And there's a lot of ways to enjoy the collecting hobby, is maybe the way that I would position that. And for me, this is just an opportunity for me to try another method. And I'll kind of report back and see how it works for me, because then maybe it's another option that I have available to me for certain cards that are going to work for me as far as getting cards in for EPAC or cards that fit into a certain PC side of the collection. It's probably going to be mostly AEW stuff, if I'm being completely honest, because a lot of this EPAC stuff that I get is from that. Although they got the Marvel stuff and all that, which isn't something I'm interested in, but it's definitely an option for certain folks when they want to be able to collect from that side of things. All right, last up, a couple of thoughts as far as, content, the YouTube channel, all that stuff. I did talk about it, and whenever I do my year-end things, one of the things that I talk about is the YouTube channel and kind of the plans, is because the YouTube channel is kind of the flagship of everything, and kind of what I plan as far as different things that I do in terms of making stuff like this, making stuff on the YouTube channel, doing the live streams, all that good stuff. And a lot of my plan was this year to stay the course, and that's still the plan. Although I do think it might be worthwhile to refine certain elements of it and also kind of make clearer what things are and what they aren't, because I sometimes will listen in on some of the feedback and get some of the questions we get, and it reminds me that not everybody is aware of what it is I'm trying to do with a lot of this stuff. So it's be good to give a little bit of a reminder. And what it really comes down to is this: the YouTube channel is just an extension of my hobby, which is to say that I kind of want to, there's certain things that make sense for me that I enjoy doing, and I'll share those. There are things where showcases for certain collections I do, or, the pickup videos are mostly honestly for my purposes so that I can keep track of how much stuff came in during the year, so that I kind of have a good understanding of what the year was in review. It's like a video diary, so to speak. It tells me what came in, it tells me when I got it, and sometimes I'll tell a little story related to it, and it's a good reminder for me to check at the end of the year and get a sense of how things move from year to year to year. So that's been the purpose of that. I'll make videos and do these things where I'll talk about different topics, because sometimes I think there's some value to it, and hopefully some people get some value out of it. That's, your mileage may vary. But it's, again, just another thing that I enjoy doing. It's an extension of the hobby that allows me to enjoy it that way without just buying stuff all the time, which is really important and something that helps extend the enjoyment of the hobby for me personally. But at the same time, I also will have videos where I'll talk about new stuff. And I do have a lot of interest in the industry and what happens with it, because I do see that a lot of these things that happen, a lot of what these companies do, does have an impact sometime downstream in terms of what happens with my collecting. Obviously, if I'm collecting something vintage, then something in a new product, a new Topps product, or a new Panini product or whatever, is not going to impact that. But I do collect some modern stuff and ultra modern. So where that comes into play, then it does affect it. And a good example of that I'll give you is the expansion of Fanatics into the live streaming. So it hasn't started yet, but it's one of those things where Fanatics is going to enter into that space and then, kind of throw their hat in the ring against kind of the Whatnots and the eBay Lives of the world. And that is actually a big potential downstream issue, but not something that necessarily affects us today. And what I mean by that is this: somebody who, again, I'll go back to the example that I gave a moment ago. Somebody who collects, purely vintage, whatever, it's not going to affect you at all. Don't even worry about it. But again, I always find it very amusing, kind of, and this is the nature of doing videos, content, whatever. There's always the folks that want to interject themselves. They'll talk about something that literally doesn't affect them whatsoever, but then they're like, oh, this is terrible. Or they say, oh, this doesn't affect me. It's like, well, if it doesn't affect you, then why are you even commenting on it? I appreciate your enthusiasm for it, but if you're not involved in it whatsoever, it's like you being a person who drives a Toyota, I'm just using this as an example, and you're worried about and you're complaining about the price of a Bugatti Veyron. Well, I'm not in the market for Bugatti Veyron either, but at the same time, I'm not running around looking for every opportunity to go, oh, that's a ripoff. It's that car's overly expensive. It's like, you weren't going to buy one anyway, so what are you even complaining about? Why is this your problem? A lot of folks in the hobby like to interject themselves into problems that do not concern them and will never concern them. It's very strange. But the point is that when it comes to this, the majority of people are not going to get affected by it. And the reason for that is that the majority of us, honestly, aren't involved in breaking. I probably can count on one hand the number of times that I've been involved in a break. So anything that affects a break or breakers or whatever, I really don't care. But since I do collect some modern and ultra modern, there are certain scenarios where it can affect a little bit. And what I mean by that is this. So when we're talking about new products, so let's say there's something in a new product that I want, I'm not going to participate in many breaks. And like I said, I can count on one hand the number. but there are certain scenarios where it makes sense. But most of the time, I'm quite willing to wait and buy the singles. But the problem is when we're anything that affects breaking, that is one method by which singles can be put onto the market. So even though you personally are not going to be doing any breaking, you still need somebody to open the product, because by somebody opening the product, that's the way, the avenue by which the cards can get onto the market and by which you can buy your singles. So you need somebody to do that, and anything that affects that can potentially change some of the dynamics. So if Fanatics does its own thing and it favors certain breakers, which one would be, it would be hard to believe that they wouldn't. It's something where you have to kind of look forward and go, what's the downstream impact here? If there's less breakers that are able to get the product, then it gets consolidated in a certain amount of hands. So does enough product get broken for the singles to make it onto the market? Does the pricing get affected? Because then Fanatics have a lot more control over the distribution method, just another way of distributing, really, at the end of the day. So with more control, does that mean that the prices start off even higher? Does that affect how the singles are put into the market? Do less singles get put into the market? Do they make less product in order to keep the price higher? All these things that Fanatics can do, because Fanatics is the manufacturer as well. So by being the manufacturer and then by controlling the distribution side of things, then they've got their hands in a lot more areas of control here. And that is always impactful. How much impact? That's the part we're still trying to figure out, because it's going to change as time goes on and we're going to have to find out altogether. So with all that said then, why didn't I make a standalone video on this earlier? And the truth is because even though I do see the potential for a downstream impact on it and something that can affect an area of collecting that I do, it doesn't affect me today. And even though I can kind of keep an eye on it going forward in the future, we need more information. It's one of those things where just the announcement of it really wasn't something that I felt compelled to run out and talk about. And that kind of goes to what I was saying a little bit earlier, is that I'm the editor-in-chief as far as the YouTube channel is concerned. So I kind of decide, even though I do have interest in a lot of these news things, I'm more interested in talking about stuff that I can kind of relate to or that is relevant to things that might be interesting for me. So I'm going to spend more time on those, and those are more interesting for me to talk about. The other stuff I can usually put on the live stream and we can chat on them if people would like to chat on them. And that's kind of the way that I separate out the different news items. Sometimes there's ones that, hey, I know for a fact that this could potentially have some impact. It could be something that we could spend more time discussing down the road, but it's not something I necessarily need to spend too much time on today, because it's not going to change life for us today. And the majority of people that I think listen to what I'm talking about or listen to a lot of these channels aren't going to care one way or the other who is doing the breaking. All they're really going to care about is, okay, if there are cards that they're pulling that I want, are they pulling them? Are they out there? Are they going to make it onto the market? The rest of it, don't care about it one way or the other. And if that's the case, then obviously this is not going to make too much of a difference for you one way or the other. As a person who's observing the industry, it's still relevant for me to kind of keep an eye out on, something that interests me, but not enough to go out and make a standalone video on it and talk about it beyond talking about it on the live stream. And then if something concrete happens, if Fanatics actually announces and says, okay, these are our favorite breakers, these are the only ones that are going to go on our platform. Everybody else, you can only get the boxes on the secondary market. Good luck to you. So you're going to be charging more than everybody else. So that's going to hinder the market. That's going to change things. That's going to change the dynamic, and that's going to affect the distribution of product. And at that point, then it's much more of an interesting and more deep discussion point, which can actually affect the collector. As it stands today, it's one of those things that's just something interesting to keep an eye out on. We can speculate on a little bit, but right now we don't know enough to know even what we don't know. So with that said, that's a couple of thoughts on that. I also did want to elaborate a little bit on my thoughts of how I do separate out some of the stuff that I choose to make videos on versus stuff that I kind of choose to leave to the live stream or to other formats. Also, just quickly talking about the live stream itself, I do get a kick out of the idea that I think it's become a lot of different things for a lot of different people. But so I'll kind of share with you my thought process and kind of my vision of what it is. I talk about it as being a panel show, but just by definition it is. You basically have a panel and it's a show, it's a panel show. Now, I think the idea is that it has to be a little bit contentious, or that it has to be like this series of argumentation and that you have to, like, you know, represent all sides. It's like, no, I really don't. It's more than anything, it is a panel show in the sense that we have a panel of people talking about these things and giving some perspective. But at the same time, maybe we agree or maybe we disagree. But it's one of those things where it's just going to depend on where everybody's coming from on it. The other part of it is, honestly, it's not meant to be taken that seriously. It is more of a hangout. It does offer an opportunity to create a bit of a forum for one segment, but I'm not going to pretend that it covers all angles. It certainly doesn't, because collectors inherently have a certain biases, and somebody who's more of a dealer is going to have a different bias, and someone who is who works for one of the companies is going to have a different perspective. In order to try to fully capture a holistic view, realistically, you'd want to cover all those angles. And it's not just something I have the time for. It's something that I do know a couple people in those categories that in certain topics it makes sense for me to do so. But a lot of times, and the live stream itself kind of lends itself to that if someone listens to it, The fact that we'll sometimes go and have a bit of a tangent on wrestling or music or TV shows or movies or whatever, it's not meant to be a strictly sports card show. It's sports cards will be the anchor point by which other things get played off of. But it can be a discussion on a variety of these things. It can be a discussion on who got the first three-pointer in NBA history. If you listen to the live stream, then you know it could be one of millions of people, hundreds of thousands at least. But it's not meant to be taken seriously. It's meant to be a Friday evening sit down. It's where we sit down, we have our beer at the virtual bar, so to speak, and then kind of enjoy talking about these things, talking about silliness, sometimes seriously, sometimes way less seriously. And it's just meant to be a little bit of fun. And I think if folks take it in that context, I think they'll probably get the most out of it. And if you are looking for the hard-hitting kind of journalistic view on it, then you're probably not going to get it there. We'll have moments of lucidity, but it's literally fleeting moments of lucidity, followed by a lot of idiocy and nonsense. And if you take it in that context, I think you'll get the most enjoyment out of it. If that's not what you're looking for, well, then there's lots of other options out there that I think will probably serve you better. So just wanted to kind of clarify my take on what the live stream stands for as far as the YouTube channel is concerned. But anyway, so I think that's a good for another audio version of the podcast. Like I said, I will try to do these about once a month. The cadence is going to depend on what comes up and what I can come up with. But otherwise, there'll be more coming down the pipeline. 2023, I think, will be an interesting year. I think there'll be a lot of opportunities, and there's still a lot of uncertainty going forward. So we're going to have to see what twists and turns stand for us. But anyway, that concludes episode 30 of the Because I'm Carlos podcast. So if you're listening on the audio side of things, you probably can get it on Spotify, Google Play, wherever you get your podcasts. It's been distributed to a couple of different ones, so I'd love if you left a 5-star review or whatever option you have available to that. If you're checking it out on the YouTube channel, then you've got the usual complement of options. You can comment on it and give some thoughts. Otherwise, I'd love if you'd like it. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. More videos that are going to come up on the channel, and also the audio versions will be available archived there as well. With that said, thanks very much. We'll catch you in the next one.